Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking all about web scraping. Now, web scraping is a really cool part of programming because it allows us to automate the process of scraping data from websites. So in this video specifically, what I'm going to be doing is going to MLB.com and scraping all of the players from every single team. Now, eventually what I want to do is build out an application that allows me to just enter in a team. It gives me all the stats, all the player stats, as well as maybe some predictive analysis of how these players are going to do down the line based on trends, but that's such a huge project. What I want to do is break down how requests work, how web scraping works, how we do this with Python, and then hopefully you guys can build out your own ideas and run with it. So let's jump right in. All right, so the first thing we're going to do to build our MLB scraper is we are going to create a new folder under some directory on our Mac or on our computer, and I'm going to call this MLB Scraper. So this is going to be called MLB Scraper, and I'm going to cd into this, and you can see I don't have any files in here by running ls. Now let me jack this font up a little bit more, and what we're going to do is we are going to create our virtual environment that we need to install the packages such as requests and Beautiful Soup. So let's run python 3-m venv. Now this will create a new directory, and when we run ls, you'll see venv has been created. To get into this, we'll go source venv bin activate. Now you can see this venv has been appended to the left side. If we run pip list, you'll see that the only thing that is returned is pip. Now we have to install two packages for our code today, and what we're going to do is we're going to say pip install requests. All right, successfully installed. We run pip list. We will see this installed with some other packages as well. Then let's run pip install Beautiful Soup 4. Now, Beautiful Soup will allow us to parse HTML, and I will explain what HTML is momentarily. But next thing we're going to do is just create our app.py file. So let's jump into this and let's look at the code. So what we need to do here is we need to open our folder, and we're going to call this MLB Scraper, obviously. So let's import this, and we'll say yes, and now let's look at our file. Cool, so we have a blank canvas, fresh start, let's do something. Awesome. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to install our libraries. Let's install requests, and then let's say from BS4 import Beautiful Soup. Cool. So this is really all we need in this application today. Isn't that wonderful? So how do we actually scrape this data? What are we going to be scraping? So let's go into MLB.com, and if we look at rosters, I specifically was looking at the Red Sox roster, and I clicked on 40-man. Now you could click on non-roster coaches, whatever, depending on what you want to scrape, but I want to scrape the 40-man roster. So what we are essentially going to be doing is getting all of the players, as I mentioned. Now the cool thing about the MLB URL, you can see Red Sox is part of the URL, but what if I change this to White Sox? You'll see this loads with the White Sox, and it's the same format. So MLB.com has a standard of how they list players, and all you have to do is construct the URL by changing White Sox, Red Sox, Cubs, whatever you want. Okay, cool. So what does this HTML look like, and what is HTML? Well, if you run Command-Option-J and you look at the elements, you'll see that this is our dev, our Chrome browser web tools. So if we click on this left arrow with the box and then look at a picture, Chase Anderson, for example, you'll see that this is all HTML. TD tag, TR tag, tbody, div, bunch of TRs, main, script, all these are HTML tags. And this is what we're going to be using to get that data with Beautiful Soup. So let's start looking at the code and how we're going to do this. Like I mentioned, we need to define a URL that we're reaching out to. So let's look at this URL specifically. https www.mlb.com/Red Sox /roster/40man. So this is going to be our URL. Let's store this in a variable, which is a string. Cool. So let's make this very simple so far. If I want to reach out and get this URL, we can set a variable called response, and let's make a GET request to get this URL. So run request get URL, and then print the response. Cool. So let's run Python 3 app.py. And you'll see we get a 200 response. So we print the response that we get from requesting the URL. So we essentially made a get to MLB.com servers for this URL, and what does it give us back? It gives us back a 200, which is all gravy. So let's move on. Now, what we need to do next is we need to say, okay, when do I want to execute this code? When do I want to start searching for players? Well, I want to start searching for players when the response.status code, which is returned along with this response object, is not equal to 404. Or we could say equal to 200. So any other case, it's going to fail, but then let's print response. Cool. So now we get this back, and obviously it's a 200. Now anything under an if statement in Python needs to be indented with a tab. So we're going to tab in, and now what we need to do is we need to start using Beautiful Soup to get this data. So what we've done so far, we've defined a URL, which is to get the Red Sox roster. We've made a response or a GET request to that URL, and then we said, if the response is 200, which in HTTP means we've made a request and MLB.com said, yes, this is successful. It gives us something back. So, if you want to see what that looks like, you can actually print out the response.content. And look at this. Holy ugly. This is really terrible in terms of formatting, right? This is so much data. And what it's really returning you is this entire HTML doc. And this is so much data, and this is all nested. So what I mean by nested is HTML kind of works like a tree structure, where it goes div, and then there's something nested in that, and then nested in that, and there's parents and children, and it gets really, really confusing. So how do we actually get the data we want? Well, we use something called Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup allows us to interact with HTML, or what is called the DOM. So let's start messing around with Beautiful Soup. So the first thing we're going to do is we imported Beautiful Soup. Now let's say soup equals Beautiful Soup, and then we're going to say response.content, and then we're going to define it as an HTML.parser. If you're curious how Beautiful Soup really works, you can go to the documentation and read up more on it, but essentially it allows us to parse the HTML from the response we get from that URL. And like I said, HTML just makes up our web page. So let's print out the type of soup. And you'll see what I mean here momentarily. Let's print the type of response, and you'll see, let's clear this out, that I get request.models.response in bs4.beautifulsoup. So essentially what we're getting back is a requests response, which has a specific type, which is a class, and then we're actually converting it into Beautiful Soup so that we can start to mess around with the HTML, reference HTML tags in it, because if I say, you know what, give me response.div, it's not going to know what that is. But soup.div, now that's a different story. It knows what I'm talking about. So it knows how to grab HTML, and that's why Beautiful Soup is so cool. So now let's start to figure out where are our players in the HTML. So if we look at Chase Anderson, let's take a look at what this is wrapped under. So it looks like there's this div players that makes up this entire list, or this entire 40-man roster. So I want to say, give me all of the players back. Now how do I do that? Well, Beautiful Soup has a really cool way. So let's say players, or let's call this 40-man roster. And I forgot in Python, you can't use numbers for variable names. So let's call this 40-man roster is soup.find div. And then we're going to reference the class of players. So what did I do? I really just said find this div with the class of players. And you can do this by div, comma, players. You could also do this another way in Beautiful Soup, but I'll let you explore that, mess around with it. This isn't a Beautiful Soup tutorial. But essentially, now we can go one deeper. So if we print 40-man roster, you can see we get everything under the 40-man roster. So you'll start to see we have things like Brian Bayo, right? One of the pitchers for the Red Sox, Brendan Bernardino. But we have a lot of other crap that's along with it, the height, the weight, the date of birth, all this stuff. I don't really want that, to be honest. I just want the name. So what I have to do now is I have to say, give me one more deeper than players, right? So what's under players? Well, it looks like we have multiple roster tables. So these tables here represent a section of players. So you can see that if we scroll down, and let me move me over, that this table specifically only references the pitchers. But this one references the catchers, and this one the infielders, and then outfielders, and so forth. So what happens if I want to get all of these tables? I can't just look at one specific one, because then I'm going to have to manually go over each and every one of them. That's a headache. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say find all of the tables with roster table. So I should get back 1, 2, 3, 4, which is pitchers, catchers, infielders, outfielders, right? So let's go find, and we can chain this onto our div that we found, and we can say find the table, right, because it's a table element in HTML, and then say class is roster underscore underscore table. So now when we print out the 40-man roster, you can see, voila, we get everything under the roster table. So let's do something called outputting to standard file, or standard output to a file. Yes, we're going to route standard output to a file. So when we print something, we get a bunch of HTML, and it's kind of gross. But what if we want to look at this in kind of a prettier way? What we can do is run this app and then use this greater than in the terminal and then say output.html. So now when we get this file, our text editor does something very smart, and it identifies, hey, this is HTML code, so I'm going to format it as such, which is awesome, so we don't have to kind of look at this in a terminal and it's really all gross and no syntax highlighting or whatever. So now we have a lot more data, and it's a lot more useful to us. We have our tables, but if we print out the length, meaning how many tables did we get back, we can wrap this in a len, or len, and you can see that this actually gets updated to 5. Now I'm actually curious why we got 5 of these, because I thought we were only supposed to get 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know. Interesting. But maybe there's another one that I'm just not accounting for. So let's figure out why that might be. So let's say for roster in 40-man roster, print length of roster, and let's output that. You can see 5, 1, 3, 1, 53, 1. Okay, so looks like we might be getting some additional stuff, and this is just outputting the length of each roster. So let's look at the roster. Let's find something under the roster, right? So let's go roster dot find, and then what's under our roster. So in the HTML, we see under a table there's what's called a T-body, and a T-body is made up of every single player. So the body, there's a table, then under that's a body, and then under that is a bunch of TR elements. So let's go back to the code, and let's say find T-body dot find all TR. So this should give me all of my roster elements, right? So it should probably give me all of my players, actually. So let's call this variable players, and then let's print players. Get rid of our length. Let's run this, and then it's yelling about find all. So why is it yelling about that? So we found all. No, we'll want to find all. Oh, I see what we did. We didn't use find all, we used found. So it just found the first one. Okay, and that's a beautiful soup thing. So now we run this, and we're actually going to get all of our elements. You can see we have over 900 lines of code or HTML that's been outputted to us now, because what we've done is we've said find the div players, then find me all of the roster tables under the table element, and then loop over that, all those tables, and give me the players. Find each and every player. So now that we have that, we can print that out, and then that's what we get here. The problem is everything's wrapped in a TD. So what do we do in that case? Well, we need to loop over our players, right? So we need, for every player, we need to get their name. We have their elements, which means we have their TRs, right, in HTML terms, but we actually want their TD info. And their info contains their name, which is such an annoying thing, right? It's like, why does HTML have to be this hard and this unstructured? Let's make this easier so I can just get it all. But what we do have here is a starting point. So now that we have our TRs, we can say for player in players, right? Let's get rid of our print. So we're actually doing a double for loop here, or a nested. You would call this a nested loop. If you're not too comfortable with nested loops, for the sake of this tutorial and this video, don't worry too much about it, but I would definitely recommend learning them. So let's say, let's just say found player, and we're going to say player, which is the item we're iterating over in the players. So our players, you know, is this TD, right? This TD tag. So let's take just one of these, right? And let's create a new file and just paste this in here. So everything in here is nested, right? So let's tab this in and let's tab all this in. So what we're doing and what we're saying is we found all of the TRs, and now we have all of the TDs. But we need to go into the TDs, which is the player itself, HTML-wise, and then get the specific href, which gives us the player's name, right? So what we want to do here is we want to say, let's find the TD. So go into the TD and find that, and then instead of giving me the player thumb, because I don't want the player thumb, I actually want the info, the class info, right? Because if we look back at the HTML, TD class info is what gives us all the stuff we need. We need Chase Anderson. So let's go back to our app and say TD, and the class is info. And then inside of this, right, we want the A tag. So let's go .find A. And then let's print the found player. So now let's run this. Out. Look at this. All right, we are in a pretty good spot here. So we get every player that is a part of the Boston Red Sox. And you can see it's actually 45 people on this roster. So is this actually a lie that it's a 40-man roster? Maybe. Okay. So I'm not going to actually individually count these, but they might be counting, it's actually a 45-man roster. I think they're lying. But, okay, so now that we have the found player, if I was like looking at this data, I wouldn't want this. I wouldn't want the tag. I just want the data in it. So what I can do is I can say found player.string. Now let's run this again. Boom, we have everything. Isn't that sweet? So now what I can say is let's go print let's print team, and we're going to set team as a variable. So team is going to be a variable up here, and we're going to call this Red Sox. Now I want my URL to be dynamic, right? Maybe I want to pull this in for a different team. So let's change our URL to be a formatted string, which allows us to pass a variable. So this can now be dynamic. If I change this to White Sox and run this, Look at this. Completely different roster. Now I get Tanner Banks, Mike Clevenger, and now I get, where's my man, Martin Maldonado. We traded him from the Red Sox. But what you can see is now we have all of our players, and above we get our team name. So we could actually say print in a string. We'll just do a bunch of colons here. And when we run this again, bam, look at that, White Sox. Everyone, Justin Anderson, Tanner Banks, you name it, we got them. So let's take this one step further. Now, what I can do, instead of making this static and being just the Red Sox when I run this script, I can make it dynamic. So let's say this is going to be equal to input. And our input's going to say enter team name. And then we have a colon. So when we run this now, you're going to see enter team name, and then we can say, let's say Yankees. It's going to get Yankees, spit out a 200 because we print our response, and then we're going to get all of the players on the Yankees. Aaron Judge, Anthony Volpe, Oswaldo Cabrera, right? Now what if we want to make this something else? So let's go Cardinals. 200 gets everyone on there. Awesome. So now we're getting players for every single team, and the reason we can do this is through web scraping. Now, if we wanted to go one step further and actually do this in an automated way so we don't have to run it every time, what we can do is we can create an array or a list of all the teams in the MLB and then iterate over that and then run this for every single team. I'm going to leave that as a challenge. Go ahead and try it yourself, and I will see you guys in the next video.